And then the related thing that comes from that is always this question around what's called the precautionary principle, which shows up in all these conversations on things like CRISPR, which basically is this principle that basically says the inventors of a new technology should be required to prove that it will not have negative effects before they roll it out. This, of course, is a very new idea. This is actually a new idea in the 1970s. It's actually invented by the German Greens in the 1970s. Before that, people didn't think in those terms. People just invented things and rolled them out. And we got all of modern civilization by people inventing things and rolling them out. The German Greens came up with the precautionary principle for one specific purpose. I'll bet you can guess what it is. It was to prevent
famine?
Nuclear power.
Oh.
It was to shut down attempts to do civilian nuclear power. And if you fast forward 50 years later, you're like, wow, that was a big mistake, right? So what they said at the time was you have to prove that nuclear reactors are not going to melt down and cause all kinds of problems. And of course, as an engineer, can you prove that will never happen? Like you can't. Like you can't rule out like things that might happen in the future. And so that philosophy was used to stop nuclear power, by the way, not just in Europe, but also in the US and around much of the rest of the world. If you're somebody who's concerned about carbon emissions, of course, this is the worst thing that happened in the last 50 years in terms of energy. We actually have the silver bullet answer to unlimited energy with zero carbon emissions, nuclear power. We choose not to do it. Not only do we choose not to do it, we're actually shutting down the plants that we have now. Right, in California, we just shut down, the big plant. Germany just shut down their plants. Germany's in the middle of an energy war with Russia, right? That we are informed is existential for the future of Europe.
But unless the risk of nuclear power plant meltdown has increased, and I have to imagine it's gone the other way.
Yeah.
What is the rationale behind shutting down these plants and not expanding them?
Because nuclear is bad, right? Nuclear is icky. Nuclear has been tagged.
It just sounds bad.
Yeah.
Nuclear.
Yeah.
Go nuclear.
Nuclear. Well, so what happened?
We didn't shut down postal offices, and you hear go postal.
So what happened was, so nuclear technology arrived on planet Earth as a weapon, right? So it arrived in the form of the first thing they did was in the middle of World War II. So the first thing they did was the atomic bomb they dropped on Japan. And then there were all the debates that followed around nuclear weapons and disarmament. And there's a whole conversation to be had, by the way, about that, because there's different views you could have on that. And then it was in the 50s and 60s where they started to roll out civilian nuclear power. And then there were accidents. There were accidents. There was 3 Mile Island melted down, and and then Chernobyl melted down in the Soviet Union, and then even recently Fukushima melted down. And so there have been meltdowns. And so I think it was a combination of it's a weapon, it is sort of icky. Scientists sometimes say the ick factor, right? It's radioactive. It glows green. And by the way, it becomes like a mythical, fictional thing, and so you have all these movies of horrible, supervillains powered by nuclear energy and all this stuff.
Well, the intro to The Simpsons, right, is the nuclear power plant and the three-eyed fish and the, all the negative implications of this nuclear power plant run by, at least on The Simpsons, idiots, and that is the the dystopia where people are unaware of just how bad it is.
And who owns the nuclear power plant, right? This is evil, this evil capitalist, right? So it's connected to capitalism, right? And
so we're blaming Matt Groening for the demise of a particular.
He certainly didn't help.
No, he didn't.
Right? But it's literally this amazing thing where if you're just thinking rationally, scientifically, you're like, okay, if we want to get rid of carbon, this is the obvious way to do it. So okay, fun fact. Richard Nixon did two things that really mattered on this. So one is he defined in 1971 something called Project Independence, which was to create 1,000 new state-of-the-art nuclear plants, civilian nuclear plants in the U.S. by 1980, and to get the U.S. completely off of oil, and cut the entire U.S. energy grid over to nuclear power electricity, cut over to electric cars, the whole thing, detached from carbon. You'll notice that didn't happen. Why did that not happen? Because he also created the EPA and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which then prevented that from happening, right? And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did not authorize a new nuclear plant in the U.S. for 40 years.
Why would he hamstring himself like that?
He got distracted by Watergate and Vietnam.
I think Ellsberg just died recently, right? The guy who released the Pentagon Papers. Yeah, so
it's this thing,
complicated.
But it's exactly. It's this thing. Yeah, he didn't. He left office shortly thereafter. He didn't have time to fully figure this out. I don't know whether he would have figured it out or not. Look, Ford could have figured it out. Carter could have figured it out. Reagan could have figured it out. Any of these guys could have figured it out. It's the most obvious. Knowing what we know today, it's the most obvious thing in the world. The Russia thing is the amazing thing. It's Europe is literally funding Russia's invasion of Ukraine by paying them for oil, right? And they can't shut off the oil because they won't cut over to nuclear, right? And then, of course, what happens, okay, so then here's the other kicker of what happens, right? Which is they won't do nuclear, but they want to do renewables, right? Sustainable energy. And so what they do is they do solar and wind. Solar and wind are not reliable because it sometimes gets dark out and sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And so then what happens is they fire up the coal plants, right? And so the actual consequence of the precautionary principle for the purpose it was invented is a massive spike in use of coal.
That's taking us back over 100 years.
Yes, correct. That is the consequence of the precautionary principle. Like that's the consequence of that mentality. And so it's a failure of a principle on its own merits for the thing it was designed for. And then, there's a whole movement of people who want to apply it to every new thing. And this is the hot topic on AI right now in Washington, which is like, oh my God, these people have to prove that this can never get used for bad things.
Oh, is there a good, solid PR firm working from the nuclear side?
Thunbergian. Greta Thunberg.
Thunbergian.
Thunbergian. Like if she was in favor of it.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, she's not. She's dead set against it.
She said that.
100%. Yeah.
Based on
Thunbergian
principles.
The prevailing ethic in environmentalism for 50 years is that nuclear is evil. Like they won't consider it. There are, by the way, certain environmentalists who disagree with this. And so Stuart Brand is the one that's been the most public, and he has impeccable credentials in the space. And he wrote this
Whole Earth Catalog.
Whole Earth Catalog guy, yeah. And he's written a whole bunch of really interesting books since. And he wrote a recent book that goes through in detail. He's like, yes, obviously the correct environmental thing to do is nuclear power. And we should be implementing Project Independence. We should be building 1,000. We should specifically. He didn't say this, but this is what I would say. We should hire Charles Koch. We should hire Koch Industries, right? And they should build us 1,000 nuclear power plants, right? And then we should give them the Presidential Medal of Freedom for saving the environment.
And that would put us independent of our reliance on oil.
Yeah, then we're done with oil. Like just think about what happens. We're done with oil, zero emissions. We're done with the Middle East. We're done. We're done. We're not drilling. We're not drilling on American land anymore. We're not drilling on foreign land. Like we have no military entanglements in places where we're drilling. We're not, despoiling Alaska. We're not nothing. No offshore rigs. No nothing. We're done. And you basically you build state-of-the-art plants engineered properly. You have them just completely contained. When there's nuclear waste, you just entomb the waste, right, in concrete. And so it just sits there, forever. It's just very small, footprint, kind of thing. And you're just done. And so this is like to me, it's like scientifically, technologically, this is just like the most obvious thing in the world. It's a massive tell on the part of the people who claim to be pro-environment that they're not in favor of this.
And if I were to say, tweet that I'm pro-nuclear power because it's the more sustainable form of power, if I hypothetically did that today, what would happen to me in this?
You'd be a crypto fascist,
Interesting.
Dirty, evil capitalist, monster. How dare you?
Yeah,
right?
I'm unlikely to run that experiment. I was just curious. That was what we call a Gedanken experiment.
You're a terrible, Andrew. You're a terrible human being. Wow. We were looking for evidence that you're a terrible human being, and now we know it, right? And so this is a great example of the. I gave Andrew a book on the way in here with this. My favorite new book. The title of it is "When Reason Goes on Holiday," and this is a great example of it. Is the people the people who simultaneously say they're environmentalists and say they're anti-nuclear power, like the positions just simply don't reconcile. But that doesn't bother them like at all. So to be clear, I predict none of this will happen.
Amazing. Yeah. I need to learn more about nuclear power.
Long coal.
Long coal.
Invest in coal.
Because you think we're just going to revert.
It's the energy source of the future.